Hey everyone, thank you for joining this webinar. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. Before we get started, I want to go over what SKAI is a little bit. SKAI stands for Sagacious Kids Aiming to Inspire. We're a social venture inspiring education through peer-to-peer learning. And what peer-to-peer learning is for us is no adult teachers. So it's just us teens and tweens sharing with each other. I know, freedom, right? That's what we all want. Our website is www.skai.org. You can go on there, take a look at our upcoming classes, and you can also see videos of our previous classes. So let's jump right into today. Today we're going to be talking about COVID-19, decoding COVID-19, and getting to the heart of the issue. Just by the way, just a little disclaimer, this presentation represents our own research and conclusions, so we're not scientists or medical professionals in this field, so this is solely based off the research we have done, but do keep in mind that we have tried to source sources like the CDC and WHO as much as we can, so try to be as reliable in what we have presented. So as you know, today's topic is decoding the impact of COVID-19. Why is it such a big deal? You know, we hear about it all day. It's all over the news. It's on the newspaper. Everyone seems to be talking about it. But why is it such a big deal? First, let's identify 10 historical pandemics, okay? And you can just skim this. It's not super important, but I want to put this up there just to give you an idea on where COVID-19 lies, okay? It's right up there with things like smallpox, H1N1, and Ebola, HIV, AIDS, and SARS. Okay, so this is not your common cold or your flu. This is a real pandemic, and it is up there with things like HIV and Ebola. Now we have a comparison to the flu, and we put this up here because COVID-19 is compared to the flu quite often. A lot of people go, oh, well, it's not worse than the flu. The flu is even worse. Why are we worrying about COVID-19? Well, I'm going to show you why. If we look on the diagram on the left, it's a diagram on how the seasonal flu and COVID-19 compares. I don't know if you guys have watched the movie Contagion. I watched it a couple days ago. I don't think it's that great of a movie, but it was pretty informational, actually. They do talk about the RO number, which is called R naught, and that stands for an estimate on how many people will be infected by an average individual with the disease. So essentially, if the R naught is if you have the disease, your R naught number is how many people you infect. For the flu, if you have the flu, you're likely to infect 1.3 people. So if you have a flu, you're going to give it to one other person. With COVID-19, it's 2 to 2.5. So if you have COVID-19, you're probably going to infect 2 to 3 other people. So much more infectious than the flu. The incubation time for the flu is 1 to 4 days for the flu. With COVID-19, it's 1 to 14 days. So higher incubation. That means that you might not even know that you have COVID-19. You could have zero symptoms at all and still be infecting other people you're around. Obviously, that just helps spread the infections and makes it a lot more dangerous. Hospitalization rate for the flu is 2%. COVID-19 is 19%. And by the way, hospitalization rate obviously um, is it means that you're sick enough that you have to be hospitalized. So about 2% of the people with the flu are sick enough to have to go to the hospital. With COVID-19, that goes all the way up to 19%. The case fatality rate, which is the death rate for the flu, it's 0.1% or less. With COVID-19, it's 1 to 3.4%. So obviously, COVID-19 is a lot deadlier. It's a lot more lethal of a disease. Even though, if we look on the right, even though South Korea's overall death rate is low, it's still far higher than that of the flu, okay? If we look on the right, that diagram, if we look on the left-hand side, the flu for ages 65 and above kills about 0.83%. That's the death rate, okay? With COVID-19, you go 80 plus, it goes all the way up to 8.23%. So obviously it's a lot more lethal to people who are older. That's just a small comparison to the flu, just because it's compared to the flu quite a bit. Now moving along, COVID-19's death rate is not as high as a handful of other major outbreaks, okay? Now, take Ebola, for example, okay? Ebola has a fatality rate of 40.4%. That means if you get Ebola, you have a really high chance of dying, okay? It's really, it could go either way, but it's a very high fatality rate. Most people would succumb to it. COVID-19, on the other hand, is 4.4% fatality rate. So obviously it's not as deadly as things like Ebola or SARS or MERS. However, if we look at Ebola and the number of countries Ebola has affected, it's only 9. Ebola has only affected 9 countries, whereas COVID-19 has affected 164 countries. So obviously, it's a lot more widespread of a disease. It's infected many more people. Ebola, 33,000 cases, 33,500 cases. COVID-19, 258,000. And keep in mind that the numbers are still coming in, and that number is getting bigger by the day. This chart was about was as of March 20th, all right, at 4 p.m. So March 20th, it was 258,000, but by now it's the 26th right now. By now it's much higher than that. So the current status in real time, and we put these down at 12:38 p.m. All right, and this is a chart, and our source for this is worldometers.info/coronavirus. It's a really great website. I recommend very highly that you check it out. It shows you all the statistics in real time, so it's very interesting to look at. Right now, the United States has 75,000 cases, 1,080 deaths, and a death rate of 1.4%. And you can take a look at all the other countries on the graph. I'll give you a second to do that. But this just shows the population, the total cases, the total deaths, and the death rate. Okay, Italy, very high death rate, 10%. I want to bring your attention to the line on the bottom, total USA cases on March 22nd during the day AM. So on March 22nd, only 4 days ago, there were about 27,000 cases of COVID-19 in the US. Now, on the 26th, there are 75,000 cases. So from 27,000 to 75,000. Obviously a huge, very steep increase. So it gives you a sense, it gives you a bit of an idea on how fast COVID-19 is moving. Digging a little bit deeper, let's take a look at the diagram on the left, illness severity of COVID-19. So, and this was a test group in China through February 11th. The test group was made out of 45,000 patients. At the time, there were about 80,000 people sick, but these charts are pretty indicative on how everything sort of played out for everyone. So, a whopping 80.9% had mild symptoms. So, just pretty much 80% of people with COVID-19 weren't really affected very much. Only 13.8% had severe symptoms, and a very small margin, 4.7%, were in critical condition. Okay, so we can see here that most people had mild cases. They weren't really affected by it. The age distribution and case fatality rate of COVID-19 in China through February 11th, same test groups. The yellow bar is the case fatality rate, and the blue is the fraction of total cases. And you see the fatality rate only really gets serious after 50 to 59, right? So starting 60 to above 80 years old, your case fatality, the possibility of death just rises. But for people who are younger, from teenagers to even 49-year-olds, maybe even 50, it's a really low margin, a really low probability that you will die from COVID-19. But in more recent news, if you look at the very bottom, in US, people under 44 make up 20% of hospitalized coronavirus patients. And this is according to the CDC. So this just goes to show that depending on where you live, COVID-19 will affect you differently. Your country may be handling it differently. So not everything is an absolute here. And it also goes to show that just because you're not old doesn't mean you're not going to be affected by it. It is still dangerous to all different ages. It's not just older people. So that's something everyone should keep in mind as we go through this. So what's the real problem? If the majority of us survive COVID-19, what's the big deal? I mean, 80% of us have mild symptoms. Why is America shutting down? Let's take a look at some recent headlines. California governor issues statewide order to stay at home as coronavirus cases soar. FEMA issues major disaster declaration for New York over coronavirus. Automakers shut North American plants over coronavirus fears. And finally, number of US cases top 30,000 as New York governor estimates 40 to 80% of the state will get coronavirus. And this was from CNN only 4 days ago. The New York governor estimated up to 80% of New York could get COVID-19. That's pretty much everyone. 80% is a huge number. All right. So what's the real problem here? Let's take a look at some projections. The CDC has various estimates based on various assumptions. For example, they projected 160 to 214 million people will be infected, 2.4 to 21 million people will be hospitalized, and finally, 200,000 to 1.7 million people would die. We look at the University of Nebraska, which put out a far greater, a much more conservative projection. They projected that only 96 million people would be infected, 5 million people would be hospitalized, and only 480,000 would die. This just goes to show how we handle this virus will produce vastly different outcomes. So let's do our own math here, okay? The population of the US is 330 million people. If we assume that 20% of the US is infected, which of course is a very conservative number, that means that 66 million people will have contracted COVID-19. If we look on the diagram to the right, and this diagram is by the CDC, it's the 2019 to 2020 US flu season preliminary burden estimates. They estimated that between 38 to 54 million people would get the flu, which is 12 to 16% of the population. And out of those people who got the flu, around 390 to 710,000 people would be hospitalized. That's 1 to 2%. So if we plug in those numbers, right, if we use that 2% hospitalization, 2% of 66 million people infected with COVID-19, that means that if 2% of people who have COVID-19 are infected, and we plug in the 20% infection rate, that means that 1.3 million people will need to go to the hospital at any point in time. All right. Now, take into account 2% is a ridiculously low number. Okay. It's so conservative, it's almost unrealistic. So if we use 5%, which is also an extremely, extremely conservative number, a little bit more realistic though. If we use 5% hospitalization rate, that means that 3.3 million people will be needing to go to the hospital. And this brings us to the real crux of the issue. In the US, we have about 924,000 hospital beds. 100,000 of those are for the critically ill. And so that means a lot of these beds are already taken by people with pre-existing conditions. What about the availability of ventilators? We know COVID-19 is likely a respiratory disease. It's in the family of SARS and MERS. And we only have 175,000 ventilators, which is obviously important in treating COVID-19. So the main point here, the key takeaway is our healthcare system will be under some serious stress. We can't really handle this. Just the amount, 3.3 million people on the most conservative estimate. 3.3 million people that need to go to the hospital, only less than 1 million hospital beds, and less than 200,000 ventilators. Let's do some math on the human toll, okay? If we assume the same 20% infection rate, which is 66 million people, just keep that in mind because that's a number that's we're going to be using even though it's pretty conservative. The death rate in South Korea is 1%, so that means 660,000 people will die. The death rate in Italy is 6.6 million people. That means so if the death rate is 10%, 6.6 million people will die in Italy. On our previous slide, the conservative projections from the University of Nebraska had an infection rate of 30% or 96 million, okay? We're using 20%, which is 66 million. And the most, and the extremely conservative projection from University of Nebraska, which is a professional projection, has it at 96 million. Now let's think about that for a second. If we have the same death rate as South Korea, who, by the way, which handled it really well. They handled maybe the best out of everyone in the world. They handled COVID-19 the best, probably. If we have their death rate, 1%, that means that 960 million people will die. About 1 million people will die if we handle this like South Korea, who handled it very well. If we have a death rate of Italy, which is 10%, we're going to have 9.6 million fatalities. For reference, the leading causes of death in the US are heart disease, which is number one. They lead with 635,000 deaths per year, and cancer trails really closely behind with 598,000 deaths per year. So essentially, if you add the two leading causes of death in the US, you get the most conservative, the most conservative death rate for COVID-19. So obviously, this shows it's going to get pretty nasty. You can plug in different numbers, you can use different assumptions, and the results can be more severe or less severe. But everything ultimately leads to the same conclusions. The conclusion is our healthcare system cannot handle the volume of incoming infections, even in a conservative case. If people don't get proper care, the death rate sharply increases. Look at Italy. Their death rate is 10%, and they're extremely short on ventilators. They don't have any more ventilators to care for people. Healthcare workers are disproportionately affected. In other words, the higher percentage of infections means that there are less healthcare workers to care for those who are sick. This just adds to the healthcare system's stress. This overall pressure and stress on the system will impact society and result in economic disaster, which is happening right now. Actually, right now, for some reason, the markets seem to be rallying, but I'm sure that we're going to be in a not so advantageous position pretty soon. The key threat here is that transmission outpaces containment efforts. So it's not only the volume, the pure sheer amount of infected people, but also the speed at which people get infected. Okay, we can't handle it. It's too fast. It's too much. What can we do about it? Number one, obviously, people are working on vaccines. The government and pharmaceutical companies are working on medicines, cures for this. We are building up medical infrastructure in the US very quickly, so we're doing a good job on that. But again, that's time and money, so that will not be instantaneous. We have to stop infections, though, and we have to do it quickly, and that's what we, the people, can do. Things like practicing good hygiene and social distancing. All right, going to the next slide, we have to flatten the curve. I'm sure many of us have heard this before, but what does it actually mean? You hear it on CNBC, Fox News, CNN, flatten the curve, flatten the curve. What does that actually mean? So first of all, the government needs to do their part to increase healthcare capacity, which they're trying to do. They're getting more beds, more ventilators, better infrastructure. And the way we flatten the curve is with protective measures like social distancing and practicing good hygiene, like we just talked about. And really, what happens when you flatten the curve is that you reduce the number of cases of COVID-19, and you're able to care for all of the sick people. We have a short animation on what flattening the curve actually looks like, and I'll explain it. Make sure you take a good look. I'll play this twice. All right, so on the left, we have the number of cases. On the bottom, we have time since the first case. So that you see that big spike right there in the very beginning in the front, that is the curve without protective measures, okay? So the number of cases spike without protective measures. And you see that dotted line? That's the healthcare system capacity. So it far surpasses our capacity to care for people if we don't implement protective measures. With protective measures, the curve is a lot more gradual. It's a flatter curve. That's what it means, to flatten that curve, so it's not a huge spike. And although we will struggle to care for everyone, the healthcare system will be under less stress. Therefore, we can care for people better. I'll play it one more time just to make sure you get a good look, and this is really key. All right, moving on. We've got to do our part, okay? Like we just discussed, social distancing, making we stay apart from each other, not gathering in concerts, going to the beach, partying and drinking with everyone else. it's a surefire way to get sick and spread this disease. We have to practice good hand washing techniques, sing happy birthday twice, the stuff that we don't really want to do, but we have to do it. This is what helps us flatten the curve and helps us reduce the spread of COVID-19. If we don't flatten the curve, the death rate will definitely increase and the economy will remain at a standstill, possibly even get worse. Don't be a COVIDiot. Don't get offended. It's just a joke, but seriously, don't be a COVIDiot. Okay. Make sure that you stay smart. Don't gather in large gatherings in public places. Stay clean. Don't touch your face. Just these simple things that are um, kind of boring and annoying to do, but they really do make a difference. So we all have to do our part with this. So these are the final thoughts. We will get through this. We just got to keep on fighting. Okay, we got to keep on fighting, and we're gonna get through this easily. We just got to make sure we practice good hygiene. We socially distance, and we're gonna be able to ride this out. If you have any questions, please contact us with feedback. I'll show you our contact information shortly. Tell us what you learned, what you liked about today's webinar, and what you would look for, what you want to look forward to in future classes or webinars. Thank you for coming. We actually have a couple other webinars planned shortly. Our virtual lifestyle Q&A will be on March 28th, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My brother will be heading this one. And because of COVID-19, I know a lot of public schools, private schools are going and heading online. And I'm not sure if you know this, but my brother and I go to an online school. So we have some experience in this, and we've been homeschooled for quite a while. So we have experience in this area, and we're just going to be answering questions that anyone has in regard to the virtual lifestyle, and explaining how we structure our days, how hard the virtual schooling is, and that type of thing. So if you're interested in that, or if you are in a physical school and have been moved to a virtual school because of COVID-19, feel free to join and we'll answer any questions that you have. We also have a climate change class, Climate Change, Destiny or Threat. And this is part of our new critical thinking series. And in this class, we're going to be talking about whether climate change is the biggest existential threat facing humanity right now. It's a critical thinking class, so we're going to show you guys some tools and structures that we like to use when we think critically. It's going to be a really fun class. Everyone's going to be able to talk and express themselves and their opinions and really reason this out. This will be on April 2nd at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as well. Our number and our email is below. You can register for our future classes at SKAIorg.com. You can also take a look at our previous classes and take a look at what our mission is, what we do. And if you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to contact us. Again, thank you for coming. I had a really great time. Hopefully you took something out of this, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.